Hey guys, how's it going? In this video, I want to talk about lessons learned from the book of Job. Now, I'm doing this video because I'm just getting over from being sick. I was out for like a week. I had to miss a week of work and everything. It was terrible. And I think it was a flu or something, but it was bad, man. It was bad. And anyways, I thought about Job and I went through the book of Job. I also listened to it while I was in bed and I just want to point out a few things that I found very significant and important that I believe people really need to see and comprehend, because a lot of people will approach the book of Job, or they'll look at it, read it, and think that God is cruel and, why would he do this to somebody who didn't do anything wrong? And the people who make these claims are people who don't know God at all. And you need to understand that if you're a child of God and you never go through any type of trouble or trials, or, your life is just one big blessing, everything's good and working out for you, well, I'd be concerned if I were you, because the devil only comes after those he's concerned with or intimidated by. You understand what I'm saying? So, I just want to go through the book of Job and just share some things that I found were significant. So, in the book of Job, in chapter 1, verse 1, it describes that he was a perfect man. He was upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. The word eschewed means to abstain from or flee from. So he abstained and even fled from evil. He was a righteous man. People have asked me in the past, other Christians, if I believe somebody can be perfect. And before, the book of Job or Job wouldn't come to my mind. So my answer was no, I don't believe somebody can be perfect in this life, because Jesus said, be ye perfect, for your Father which is in heaven is perfect. And now that I went through the book of Job again and read that verse, I do believe you can reach perfection in this life. I don't think it's easy, but I believe it is attainable, because with God all things are possible. So that's the first thing that I found significant. And then it goes on to explain the things he had. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters. His substance was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses. He had a very great household. And it says that he was the greatest of all the men of the East. So right there, we're seeing the kind of person Job was. So he was righteous. He took care of his family. He had a great house. He had a lot of cattle. He pretty much lived in abundance. He had no need for anything. It says he was the greatest man of all the East, on top of it all. And so it goes on to say that, this is how you can see that he really loved his family. It goes on to say in verse 5 that he offered burnt offerings according to the number of his family, a number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their heart. Thus did Job continually. So basically, Job continually, daily offered sacrifices on behalf of his family members, and he did it because they might have sinned in their hearts. So he didn't even know if they sinned, but he feared God so much that he was offering those offerings daily because he wanted to abide in God's grace and mercy, and just to keep his mercy, God's mercy over his family. You understand? So I wonder how many Christians do that today, where they deny themselves and continually pray for their loved ones and their family members, or those they care about who may be lost or might have sinned in their hearts. I mean, it's just really interesting to see how much Job cared about his family. And then it goes on to say in verse 6 that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. That should show you that Satan is not bound in hell and chained to the earth. He is able to travel between the heavens and the earth, and he's able to present himself before God. Now, there's different views on who the sons of God are in that verse. That's not really a concern to me, but people think it's like fallen angels or the Nephilim spoken of in Genesis. But Like I said, I want you to just see that Satan came also among them. And this is what God said in verse 7. The Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Okay, keep 1 Peter 5:8 in mind. And then it goes on to say, the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. So there's a few things that I want to point out that I found were very important to see. So the first one is that God is the one who pointed Job out to Satan. Okay? And Satan immediately knew who God was speaking of, but not only that, he knew everything about Job already. That was very interesting to me, because Satan goes on to point out everything Job had in regards to his blessings. Okay, he said, Hast thou not made a hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands. His substance is increased in the land. So we see that because Job was righteous and obedient to God and loved God and feared God, that he was protected in every way, especially spiritually, because Satan's pointing out the hedge of protection. So we see that true followers of Christ have a hedge of protection, and we see that the work of his hands were greatly blessed. Everything he did caused increase and gain, okay? His work was blessed. So that's good. That means his crops yielded abundantly, things like that. And it goes on to say that his substance was increased. So this is something that I want you to understand. Satan is going before God, okay? And he pretty much challenges God and offers propositions and ideas and ways to test the children of God. Because he pointed out in verse 9, Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Basically what he was saying is he only loves you, he's only obedient and is righteous because you bless him. And Satan was pretty much saying, if you take all that away, he'll curse you to your face. Satan does that still today towards true Christians, okay? He's not worried about lukewarm believers or fake converts, false converts. Notice that this is about Job, who was perfect and upright, one that feared God and abstained from evil. So I found that very interesting. So Satan is going to God, proposing ways to pretty much test God and say, oh, well, he only serves you because you bless him. See, Satan is trying to get God's permission to attack Job. And we see that right here in verse 11. He says, But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went from the presence of the Lord. Now I want you to understand that Satan is not tempting the Lord, okay? Satan is called the accuser of the brethren in Revelations, I think it's chapter 12, verse 10. Okay, so he's the accuser of the brethren. He's going before the Lord accusing us of our sins, of our faults, and saying, look, look, look. Okay, he's the accuser of the brethren. And he's also going to God to try to get permission to wreak havoc in our life. Why? So he can try to get us to curse God, to turn from God, to go and fall into sin, to rebel. This is what Satan is trying to do, guys. And he's only doing it to true Christians, okay? Again, this is about a righteous man, okay? And we see that the Lord gave Satan permission. He said, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So he gave Satan limitations. He said, okay, all that he has is in your hands, but don't touch him. So right there we see that Satan cannot do anything without God's permission. That should show you the level of authority God has over Satan. People have this idea Satan's running around doing whatever it is he wants to do. No. Satan is on a leash, guys. He cannot do anything without God's permission. That means everything bad that happens and every person that dies, it all happens with God's permission only. Okay? And people will be like, oh, well, then God's messed up. Why does he let bad things happen to good people? There is no good people. Okay? It says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Okay? So no one is good. There's none good, none righteous, none that seeketh after God. So people who have that mentality are already messed up. But you need to understand the reason why this world is in the condition it's in is because of our disobedience, rebellion towards God. God said my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So it's not like God is cruel. He's actually extremely righteous and just. I mean, looking at the world today should show how just God is, because we are reaping what we sow. Look around you. Look at how wicked people are. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 talks about our hearts are evil continually. So what does that tell you? So, people approach the book of Job and try to say, oh, see, God just does whatever to whoever. No, you're not understanding what's going on here. Excuse me. But anyways, goes on to see, once Satan got permission, okay, once Satan got the approval from God that he can destroy everything Job has, he immediately took action, wasted no time. Verses 13 through 19 talks about how there's 4 different servants that come up to Job, one right after another, and this happened 4 times. One came up to Job, talked about all his servants were killed, his cattle was stolen, happened again, and then his house collapsed on top of his family and killed him. So could you imagine within a couple minutes, you lost everything. Job lost everything in a couple of minutes, and only 4 of his servants survived in order to tell him what happened. I mean, wow, guys. And think about how Christians today would handle losing everything. Most Christians today, they'll put their fist towards God, and they'll curse God, and they'll rebel, and they'll say, that's just messed up. They'll turn on their faith pretty much. They'll pretty much turn on God. And that is exactly what Satan wants. It's so sad that Christians are just so shallow these days. But this is what Job did. And this is why the book of Job is in the Bible. Because he was such a perfect example, guys. This is what Job did after he just received all the news about losing everything. Okay, and yet Christians have the audacity to address God foolishly because they're having a hard time in life. And yet they have a bed to sleep in, food to eat. Sometimes people don't have that, but most times people do have that. Excuse me. Verse 20, this is what Job did. Job arose and rent his mantle. He ripped his clothing and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. Goes on in 21 and Job said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. That's what really stuck with me. Because when I was sick, I was wanting to be healed. I received prayer. I was wanting to be delivered. I didn't want to be sick. I hate being sick, guys. I feel it's a giant waste of time. I was just miserable. And at the same time, I was like, man, there's people who are going through things that are so much more worse, far more worse than the flu or whatever it is I had. There's people who got heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, fighting cancer, in their deathbed, fighting for their life. And, I'm over here complaining because I'm sick. And I was just keeping these things in mind, keeping myself in check, because I'm just like, man, Lord, I don't want to address you foolishly. And I wasn't being healed, so I was kind of getting a little upset. But then I realized God allowed me to be sick. He allowed my sickness, and he didn't want to heal me, so I just had to endure. I knew, I was like, okay, I just got to persevere. And I actually had to be thankful that all I had was the flu or whatever I had, because I could have had something much worse. I should be thankful that I have the health and the immune system that was able to kick off this sickness. You know, there's so much more to be grateful for than to be ungrateful for. And no matter what you're going through, always remember there's somebody who's going through something much worse, guys. So this is what Job points out as well that I got from this in this verse 21. He says, the Lord gave and the Lord taketh away. So he immediately recognized that everything he had wasn't even his to begin with. It was given to him by the Lord. And he was pretty much saying, you know, if the Lord wants to take away what he gave me, then blessed be the name of the Lord. He can do whatever he wants. Job recognized God's authority and recognized everything he had was because of the Lord. Most Christians are so selfish. When they lose something, they think God is punishing them. See, you don't have to do anything wrong, or, you know, just because something bad happens to you doesn't mean God's angry at you. It may be that the enemy just really wants to attack you, and God will allow it because it pleases God to see his children be tested and to endure the test on top of that, because it helps the child of God be refined. Okay, it helps the child of God, you know, become more righteous, to become more wise, to grow closer to the Lord. It also rubs the devil's face in the ground, and it also glorifies God. So all these things come about from just a test. Okay, this whole life is a test, but only the wise really understand it. So I found that really significant, guys. And it says, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. That's just so amazing, guys. And excuse me, chapter 2 pretty much goes on to say the same thing. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Satan came also among them. The Lord said, whence comest thou? Satan answered, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, and a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity. So he was still holding fast his integrity, still blessed God, still worshipped God, guys. That is so amazing. What a great example. And goes on to say that, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause, Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath he will give for his life. So God is saying, you know, you failed. Okay, he didn't curse me. God knew everything that's going to happen. He knew the beginning and the end, and he always does. But he'll allow Satan to play his little game. He'll allow us to be tested because it pleases him, okay? God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts higher than our thoughts. Who are we to dictate what God wants to do with his creation? See, people get all upset and offended because they think God is cruel. Well, those people obviously don't know God, and they're probably living in sin. And, you know, you just need to keep in mind that we are subject to God, not the other way around. And he doesn't have to answer to us for anything he does. And yet we need to be grateful that he's actually just, righteous, full of love and mercy, so much love that he sent his son to die for us. So, I mean, he's pretty righteous and awesome if you ask me, and just in everything he does. But anyways, right here we see Satan wasn't happy. He wanted to do more. He wanted to inflict more damage. He wanted to hurt Job more. Look at what Satan says, because just his terminology shows the level of wisdom that Satan had whenever this was written back then. So that's also significant to see, because he says, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. That's true. And it's very interesting that Satan had that wisdom so long ago. And it goes on to say, but put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. So we see that Satan proposed that if, you know, God took away all that he had, Job would curse God. Well, that didn't work, so that plan failed. So now he was like, okay, well, if you take his health, then he'll curse you to your face. See, Satan wants to do more. Satan's always pushing the envelope, guys. Goes on to say, sometimes the Lord will allow it, sometimes he won't. You need to understand that as well. But in this case, in what we're given in the book of Job, God allows it. And it goes on to say, the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thy hand, but save his life. Again, we see the level of control God has. And the fact that Satan can do nothing without God's approval. So important to see that, guys. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and did what? Immediately smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. So he was covered in these boils. I could only imagine how painful they were. You know? And it goes on to say in verse 9, then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. What kind of wife is that? I mean, but this is what I get from it. Satan will even use family members. He'll use friends. He'll use co-workers even to get you to curse God, to get you to rebel, to get you to sin, to get you off that narrow path, to get you to commit unrighteousness. Satan will use anybody, guys. And he will even go against you personally if God allows it. But only if God allows it. So, and notice how Satan attacks. Everything happens at once. Okay? Because when I was sick, my car also broke down. So now my car is all messed up. But when you're attacked from the enemy and you're a child of God, everything's going to happen at once. You're just going to be like, what's going on? It's the enemy attacking. And he'll try to do everything he can and hit you from every side at once. Because he wants to overwhelm you, and his goal is to get you to curse God. He wants to steal your testimony. He wants to destroy your life. And if he can, he wants to kill you. Because that's what he came to do, to steal, kill, and destroy. So, this is what Job said to his wife. Excuse me, guys. And he said, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. I couldn't agree more. What a foolish thing to say. But that, again, that just shows you that Satan was even influencing his wife. And Job goes on to say, what? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? And all this did not Job sin with his lips. Again, we see two things. That Job still respected God's authority to do whatever he wanted. And two, you can also sin with your lips. So he worshiped God, praised God, acknowledged that God is just in all his ways, and he did not charge God foolishly, and he rebuked his wife for speaking foolishly. Now this is when his three friends came and heard all the evil, and when they approached Job, they didn't recognize him, and when they did recognize him from afar off, they pretty much cried out and they wept. They started crying. Because Job was so bad looking, because he was covered in boils, he shaved his head, and it goes on to say in verse 13, it says, they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So that was pretty interesting to see that they sat there for 7 days and 7 nights because of Job's grief was so great. And I could only imagine what he was going through. I mean, he just lost everything he had, and his own house collapsed on his family. And it's just, wow, guys. And then in chapter 3, it goes on to say how, he says in verse 3, let the day perish wherein I was born. And, it goes on. He just kind of is explaining how he feels, because I could only imagine the sorrow and the emotions he was going through. But when I was reading, you see he doesn't curse God. He doesn't start raising his fist towards the Lord and getting angry. Because it goes on to explain that he recognized that this is of God. Who am I to tell God what he can and can't do? And, basically he understood that he was being tested. He knew what was going on. He knew the Lord allowed what had happened. And his three friends, instead of comforting him and, lifting him up and being good friends, they actually kind of started coming against him and saying, well, you must have sinned to cause this to happen. And they all kind of try to explain how wise and try to explain how they know God and use examples of how God curses the wicked and blesses the righteous. And they were pretty much saying, if you did sin, just confess and stuff. And they were accusing Job. They started accusing him of pride and self-righteousness, saying God wouldn't do this for no reason. And you can read the dialogue, okay? I'm not going to explain every single detail, but there's a lot of good scriptures throughout the dialogue, and it's very, very important that you read it, guys. But anyways, his three friends pretty much come against him and accuse him of sin and stuff like that. Verse 16, or chapter 16, verse 2 says, Job says, "Miserable comforters are ye all." He even wanted his friends to leave at one point, but they wouldn't. And it got to the point where the three friends believed that Job was so self-righteous, that he wouldn't even listen to reason. Like, he wouldn't even listen to them. They think that he was so right in his own eyes. But Job was just remaining steadfast because he knew he was a righteous man of God. His three friends just wouldn't believe it. So they just accused him of being self-righteous and prideful and vain and stuff like that. Now, I believe the most profound scripture in the book of Job is chapter 28, verse 28. And I'll let you guys read that on your own because it's so profound that you really need to understand it, guys. It's just so profound, guys. So amazing. And goes on to say, basically the three friends end up condemning Job. Chapter 32, this young guy comes on the scene, throws in his 2 cents. His name was Elihu. The reason I believe he was young because it says in verse 4 that all the others were elder than he. So he spoke last because he was the youngest. And he spoke from chapter 32 all the way through chapter 37. And he pretty much was prideful and self-righteous and condemned Job too. So it was just interesting to see. And then chapter 38, the Lord appears and speaks through the whirlwind. And this is when it gets really interesting. In verse 2, he says, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?" And I thought that was pretty funny because he basically just said, who's this novice? Who are these people speaking foolishly? It says, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?" What are God's people destroyed by? The lack of knowledge. And now we see that these people were speaking without knowledge. And it goes on to pretty much explain and show how God put everyone in their place. God put everyone in their place. It was pretty awesome because he was just like, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And it was pretty cool. Job answers in chapter 40, verse 4. He says, "Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth." So Job even recognized that he has nothing to say, or he's not even going to try to defend himself because he knows the Lord is just and right and everything. And then chapter 41 is entirely about Leviathan, which I found significant. And it goes on to explain he is the king over all the children of pride. So all those people who think that the spiritual warfare isn't a big deal, well, there's an entire chapter in the Bible dedicated to describing a powerful strong man, a powerful demon in the satanic kingdom. And chapter 42 goes on to say, pretty much in verse 7, it explains how God is speaking to Job's three friends and says that you have spoken foolishly and inaccurately of me. And he says, as Job did. He says, "My wrath is kindled against thee and against thy two friends, for ye have not spoken of me the thing that is right, as my servant Job hath." So when you see that, it makes you want to go back and look at the things Job did say, because what Job was saying was true, was right. And then God pretty much went on to say in verse 8, "Therefore take unto you now 7 bullocks and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job," he's talking to the three friends, "and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you. For him will I accept, lest I deal with you after your folly, in that ye have not spoken of me the thing which is right." So he pretty much told him to offer burnt offerings and to have Job pray for them, because he wasn't about to accept their prayer because they are full of pride and spoke foolishly on God's behalf. And it's interesting too, because today you got everybody who thinks they know God, understand God's ways, I can't even imagine how many people are speaking foolishly on God's behalf. And so yeah, Job ends up praying for them because God said, I'll only hear Job's prayer, pretty much. And they did as the Lord commanded them. The Lord also accepted Job. And then this is what happened to Job, because Job stood the test. He passed the test. And it goes on to say in verse 10, the Lord turned the captivity of Job, so he stopped the attack of the enemy. Okay? And I'm sure he was being tormented brutally by demons also. And when he prayed for his friends, the Lord accepted it. Also, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. So we see from the beginning he was the greatest man in all the East. Now I can't even imagine, even more so after this encounter, this experience. So Job was greatly blessed twofold and passed the test. Now that's why I believe the book of Job is like a very important book in the Old Testament, because it shows us how we need to conduct ourselves when we're being tested. And there was so much instruction in righteousness there. That's why I did this video, guys. I just want you to see how Job pretty much went through something that was worse than almost all Christians today. And yet Christians can't even conduct themselves properly like Job did. I mean, so many Christians get discouraged when they are under attack, thinking God is cursing them when really all he's doing is testing them. But they're failing the test because they're not really holding steadfast in their faith. You see, like I said, you don't have to do something wrong. God will test you because this life is a test. This life is not meant to be a giant blessing, okay? This life is meant to be, Jesus said you have to deny yourself. Blessed are they which are persecuted. So you're going to face persecution. Paul said that we're killed daily and lined up and for the slaughter as sheep, and it's just interesting to see, guys. But this life is a giant test, and when you go through testing periods where the enemy is just bombarding you, God allowed it, and you need to keep the book of Job in mind and not address God foolishly. Still bless his name, because blessed be the name of the Lord. Praise God no matter what. And I just had to be thankful that I did overcome my sickness and that I'm not in the hospital fighting for my life. It can always be worse, guys. So just keep these things in mind, and hopefully this video, gave you some good advice. If you read the book of Job and come across anything that I didn't point out, please share. I'd love to know, guys. I think the book of Job is an excellent book, and I recommend you guys read it. If you have any questions, please contact me. Otherwise, be blessed in Jesus Christ's mighty name, and I'll talk to you next time.